Now we have the first ever election integrity division at the RNC. That means massive resources going to this one thing. If people out there, Sean, don't feel like their vote counts, they don't trust the system we have, then we are no longer the country we once thought we were. We will have trained poll watchers, poll observers, poll workers, people in tabulation centers all across this country. If you want to volunteer as a poll watcher, poll worker, or a volunteer lawyer, because we want right now we have the first.
That was the end of the excerpt, which is very annoying. But this is apparently Lara Trump. Haven't seen her before, but she says the RNC will devote massive resources to election integrity, and we have the article here. Preventing cheating in November is the top RNC priority. Yes. I hate that it has to be, because promoting the candidate should be. But luckily, you don't really need to do that, because Trump is already so popular anyway. You don't really need to work too hard at that. Preventing cheating is important because, and here's the real kicker, cheating is the primary Democrat strategy. Not getting their guy elected. Cheating is their primary strategy. So matching them on that, repelling that, is actually the correct answer. So very happy that she said this, whoever the hell Lara Trump is. Maybe she's related to someone. RNC co-chair, okay, that makes it a bit clearer. Lara Trump says that protecting the vote in the upcoming November election is the most critical task for the committee. Now, very clearly, if Democrats were saying this, I would believe that they plan to rig, because they have a history of doing so. They've proven to do so. In the case of the RNC, I don't know if they have. Maybe in the past they did just as much as the Democrats, but the MAGA has never, to me, shown any evidence that they want to rig elections. So I'm willing to trust that the RNC saying that they want to prevent cheating will actually be the prevention of cheating. And I welcome Democrats to point out where they think cheating could happen so that we can solidify that. You know, voter ID, perhaps. I'm sure that they'd agree. And paper ballots. I'm sure that they'd agree. Lara Trump is Eric Trump's wife. Okay, so is that Trump's second son? Second son's wife. Okay, that's good. Thank you. Thank you, Jack. Once again, Kabbal's Encyclopedia. Lara Trump speaks during the Conservative Political Action Conference at Gaylord National Resort Hotel and Convention Center in National Harbor, MD. I didn't know it was called that. Which of you is that place named for then? I see Zane is still here. Anyway, quote, we have 3 pillars that we need to focus on at the RNC to ensure victory on November 5th. Turn out the vote, protect the vote, and raise money, she told Fox News' Sunday Morning Futures on March 10th. But I would argue that maybe the most important of those 3 is protecting the vote, election integrity. Trump was asked by host Maria Bartiromo about her opinion of Attorney General Merrick Garland's speech earlier this month, in which he suggested that it's racist not to allow the least secure methods of casting a vote in America. Yeah, complete nonsense. On March 3rd, Mr. Garland said the US Department of Justice was fighting back against efforts by states and jurisdictions to implement discriminatory, burdensome, and unnecessary restrictions on access to the ballot, including those relating to mail-in voting, the use of drop boxes, and voter ID requirements. Yeah, so it's obvious, but the efforts are to make sure the election is not rigged. And if you think it's burdensome, then you think rigging should be allowed. And it is basically that clear, because mail-in voting is always a catalyst for greater election rigging. The drop boxes thing, I have no idea why you do it that way. That's a terrible idea. And we have plenty of evidence, including video evidence, that they have been used for wide-scale voting. And the voter ID thing, I think in a very healthy system, it's probably better not to have voter ID, because you're then relying on the government to give you the ID, allowing you to vote. But in this circumstance, and especially where a lot of those states have not set up systems to block you from doing that yet, voter ID is a much better solution than none at all, because that would immediately solve the main methods of vote rigging. So yeah. Those are obvious. And if that's an imposition on blacks, then you need to remove the requirement for all licenses for blacks. Because apparently, that's the funny thing, is that they really will say anything that gets them what they want. They will say blacks are too stupid for you to impose this. Wait, aren't you the anti-racist party, allegedly? No. In fact, they will say literally whatever they want to get what they want. Whatever they need to get what they want. You'll notice that the progressive ideology, the cultural Marxist ideology, is frequently self-contradictory. And there's a reason for that. It's so that whoever claims to wield it, whoever knows how to use the language, whoever is essentially a religious adherent of it, gets power. No matter what they say, they get power, which is exactly how they wanted it. It's very convenient for corporations as well. I think that's a lot of the reason why they picked it up, is that if you introduce this miasma of demand for ideological adherence, then all a corporation has to do is wear the trappings of it, and they outdo their competition. And the big corporations are perfectly happy to do that. Quote, we have to ensure that when people go vote, they feel like their vote counts. Oh, and also to add to that, the whole idea of like Steve Jobs saying that your corporation allegiance should be like a religion. Well, this is just a greater expression of that. The corporation that shouts the loudest how much it loves the rainbow flag gets the most customers because they have been forced to care about it through ideological subversion. Well, not anymore. That's changing now. But I think that's why a lot of big corporations adopted it, because they can compete over something utterly irrelevant to the quality of the product, and then they can let the quality subside or just stagnate. It creates stagnation whilst still providing the corporations a way to earn money, which is why I think that you could describe it as an ideology industry, something that's formed in the last 20 years or so, which is a part of the problem. But I don't think it's the source anymore. I used to suspect that was the source. I think it now is just a part of the problem. I think the source now is mostly Chinese subversion. Very behind the scenes, very hard to detect, but there. We have to ensure that when people go to vote, they feel like their vote counts and they are inspired to go vote. We can never allow what happened in 2020 and the questions surrounding that election to ever happen again, said Trump. Lara, the daughter-in-law of former President Donald Trump, suggested that Democrats are against voter ID because they seek to expand their voter base with illegal immigrants, which is very true, and they've been doing that for years. Democrats are bleeding and hemorrhaging voters. They understand that they cannot fool people in this country any longer, so they have to import people, she said. And that is actually a highly accurate way of representing that. The Democrat strategies over the years have changed from, at some point, appeal to the people's interests, which is what a politician is supposed to do, but gradually they found ways to remain popular without doing that. And so gradually, get different groups on your side to help to make it look like you're still appealing to their interests without doing so. And gradually, worse and worse, more indirect, more dishonest and cheating strategies until it got to the point that they start rigging, they start creating fake votes, and they need to represent the people a little bit less for every fake vote they can create to keep it roughly even. And they were keeping it roughly even with the Uniparty, with the Republicans for years. They didn't need to worry. They could just keep it roughly at the same level, which is why now, even with the rigging, even with overflowing rigging, it probably isn't enough to compete with Trump. But especially without it, they might have half the votes he does without it, or maybe even less. And that's even still with the effect of propaganda and the manufactured consensus of having rigged all those elections and make people believe that their area is blue when maybe it's been red for 30 years. So it got to the point now that they cannot succeed in any way without cheating. They are that far in the hole and they can't climb out of it. They just have to keep digging because that's the strategy they've chosen. They can't reverse course now. If they reverse course and try to represent the people, then they're competing on Trump's terms, on MAGA's terms, and MAGA's too good at that already. The only strategy the Democrats have that can possibly work is cheating. But that's very limited. It won't work forever. It's already starting, that people have already noticed, and they won't let it happen a second time, not without a fight, I don't think. She said the only reason you wouldn't want voter ID is if you want people who cannot vote to vote in these elections. It is insane, and she's completely right. It's beyond reason. Our opponents' arguments on this, they've never been challenged in an open arena where they've had to actually explain why it's burdensome, as far as I know. She says, or the article says, roughly 81% of Americans support voter ID. I didn't know it was that high, but that's not that surprising, actually. It should be that high. According to a February poll by Pew Research, along party lines, however, 95% favor the concept, while 69% of Democrats, still a majority, support it. Nice. Even 69% of the Democrats support it. That's nice. And regardless to me, that is actually pretty high. I'm surprised it's that high. The 95 to 69, that margin there of about 26 points is the margin of Democrat propaganda. Because what else argument is there against it? According to Lara Trump, the RNC has established an election integrity division and devoted vast resources dedicated solely to this cause, which include a nationwide network of volunteers such as poll workers and poll watchers. So I've been saying for a while, and others have too, that that Trump should not be overconfident that he can win just by having so many legit votes that it outdoes the opponent's illegitimate votes. And I'm not sure if that was his strategy, but it seemed like it might have been. And I've been thinking, I hope that you have ideas. I hope that you have people working on this, people researching how the rigging is done, people working on solutions and ways to deflect it. And I don't think you should tell me what those ideas are specifically, because then that would allow the opponent to counter them. But I hope that you've got things in place. I hope that you're working on it. From this, it looks like he probably was, or people around him probably were. And that's very good. I'm very glad to see that people have been. I hope they're not just starting now, but even if they are just starting now, they've got, like 7 months roughly until the election, about 7.5 months until the election. That's still enough time to make some good progress. But I hope they've been working on it for longer than that. I hope they've been working on it for the last 4 years and they have some really good strategies and ammunition. They refine the concept in practice and in theory. So that they can deflect as much rigging as they possibly can. To those who might cheat in the upcoming election, quote, "we'll go after you and you will be prosecuted to the full extent of the law," Trump said. Good. Good. And frankly, you should be going after the people that did it in 2020 as well. There's video evidence showing who it was in some cases, and in other cases, they have other evidence that you can use. You should just put a team on that, if he has a team available. Lara Trump herself, perhaps. Legal ballot harvesting, next section of the article. As the Epoch Times notes further, Trump also told Ms. Bartiromo that the RNC would use legal ballot harvesting in this election cycle. "It is already underway and we will expand it again," she said. I don't like the idea of this, but if it's quote-unquote legal, and the Democrats are doing it too, and if the way that you're doing it does not produce illegitimate votes but merely repels the enemy's illegitimate votes, then that's okay, but I'm not happy that it's being done by anyone. Last week, Ms. Trump and Michael Whatley, chair of the North Carolina Republican Party, were elected to lead the RNC to replace Ronald McDaniel. Both were endorsed by Trump last month. I didn't know that had happened, actually. That's good, though. The leadership overhaul comes just days after Trump dominated the Republican presidential primaries on Super Tuesday on March 5th, solidifying his hold on the Republican nomination and the party itself. Last month, Ms. Trump... No, Lighthouse, if you take the attitude of war is total, then you're just as bad as your opponents and the entire system collapses. No, you need to be in a system that is not yet devolved into actual war. You need to be better than your opponent. You need to replace them with something better. And that is the correct strategy as well. If we were cheating just as hard as they were, it would leave the ground of honestly representing your people open. And by the way, we're winning by doing that. So, no, I completely disagree. You should not just adopt your enemy's strategies because they have an advantage in some arenas. It's often very bad to do that. If it's literal war, that's different. But still, if it's literal war, there are still restrictions aside from mere might. Because if it's literal war in the modern day, there are diplomatic restrictions, there are economic sanctioning restrictions that can be put on you by other countries. If you use chemical weapons on civilians, for example, you might lose some trade deals that are essential for the war effort. So no, there are still reasons, even in warfare, not to do everything you can to win. There's still reasons to have some restrictions. I mean, hell, if you drop nukes, then they'll drop nukes on you and you might wipe out the entire human race or a large part of it. So no, there are still rules that you should follow, even in actual warfare, but especially in a culture war. And by following those high standards, we are already winning. The only things that we notice that our opponent are doing, which are the real problems that people might say we should adopt their shitty strategies, are the last strategies they have left, which is the only reason that they're able to survive without doing it the right way. And it won't last either. It won't last against the force of good people acting on the path of truth. Where it says, if there has ever been need of a federal agency, it should be for making sure there isn't voter fraud. Yeah, I would agree with that. Now, it's been, we talked about this maybe a while ago, about the idea of federalizing election standards. And there's some pushback there on that states should be able to do it themselves. And I'm with you on states having the right to do that, especially for their own elections. But I think there's a strong argument to be made that for federal elections, there should be standards imposed, perhaps even in the Constitution, beyond what is already imposed, to make sure that elections cannot be rigged. That it's enforced against everyone. And maybe now is the time to do it, now that we know the main methods of rigging that they've been using, put in there that they have to be paper ballots. And maybe the voter ID thing, although I've mentioned my misgivings on that, and maybe a few other things too, that the result has to be announced within 24 hours or within 12 hours or 6 hours of the polls closing, something like that. So there's no chance for rigging it. And like no mail-in ballots except to those physically infirm. You know, the obvious standards, and maybe make that so enshrined that it's very difficult even for cheaters to use those strategies. They'll have to find new ones. It'll be even more difficult for them to do so. That I could see. Last month, Ms. Trump, so Lara, I assume, also told the Epoch Times in an exclusive interview that she would mount a ballot harvesting campaign in this election, something Republicans have been averse to in the past. Quote, "We need to have the biggest legal ballot harvesting operation this country has ever seen," Ms. Trump said. "It feels for a long time like the Democrats have been playing chess and we've been playing checkers," she said. Now, I'm not sure I like this. We'll see what she says. Her goal is for the Republican Party to be the opposite, to be steps ahead of them and on our toes and ahead of the game and facing towards the whole time. I'm not sure about that. It depends exactly what she means by ballot harvesting. I'm sure that there are ways that you can do it which do not result in illegitimate votes. And if that's what you're talking about, fine. But don't just compound their illegitimate votes with our illegitimate votes. Don't do that. I wouldn't support that at all. Ballot harvesting, legal in some states, allows people to deliver absentee or mail-in ballots to drop off points on behalf of other voters. Republicans have been skeptical of the procedure, fearing it would lead to election fraud. Democrats have been much more willing to use the strategy. If that's what it is, it certainly could be done without causing election fraud. And I would trust Republicans doing that more. But still, people should be going themselves to take to put their vote in the box. There should not be an infrastructure to permit ballot harvesting. Even for people that are infirm, that should be mailed in. Even then, like, how do you get them to the mailbox? Well, have an official postal worker come to their door, and the envelope that is submitted must be either unmarked or merely say election ballot or something like that. Maybe unmarked is better, actually. And even then, strict verification on that stuff. So, I don't know. Wes says if they're infirm, they shouldn't be voting. I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think I do. I could see there being that facility for people that cannot get to the voting place. I mean, Wes, you could have people that are physically infirm but not mentally infirm. Yeah. Yeah, you know, if they're like severely mentally ill, then probably they shouldn't be. But I'm not sure that I'd want the government to be judging the disqualification of people, even based on medical standards. I don't think I want that to happen. So I'm not sure what to do about that. But if they're mentally ill, their carer should advise against them voting. It should I mean, it shouldn't be a priority. Perhaps there's an angle there. But if the only means the Democrats have left to vote rig is to get mentally ill people to sign a ballot, that's not too bad. I know that still is wrong, but that's something to focus on separately. But I don't think that needs to be dealt with on the election level. Maybe it should be dealt with on the personal level, protect this person from being used for the election, rather than the election structure itself doing that. But I would agree on a personal level, not on a legal level. If they're infirm, they probably shouldn't be voting. Yeah, but I'm talking about physically infirm. Okay, Wes, I always associated infirm with physically. If you associated with mentally, that's interesting. I suppose like unsound I would think of as mental, and infirm I would think of as physical. But that there's nothing particularly solid to link those. It's just association, I guess. Feels as if they're too infirm to get to the post box. How can they have the ability to follow the election? Well, I assume you're joking, Phil, because televisions exist and like internet exists. I don't know what you mean by that. If we disallow the mentally ill, the vote, we pretty much wipes out the left. Depends how you judge what's mentally ill, which is, of course, the reason I'm against this, because that's too subjective. I get you're joking, but again, if you add a disqualifying factor, which is too subjective, like mentally ill is, that's exactly where the vote rigging will happen 50 years hence, or perhaps even less. I'm very reluctant to do anything like that. Whether or not Democrats do it legally, that's up for discussion, Ms. Trump said, adding that it's time for Republicans to start attacking the game differently. If you're going to do that, if you're going to do ballot harvesting, I want you to assure me that you're also going to make it disallowed as soon as you get into power, and that this will be the last time it happens. Make it an emergency response, because I don't like that as a policy. I don't like that at all. That shouldn't be happening. That just breaks the chain of custody. It breaks the chain of custody in a fundamental way, such that those votes can't really be trusted anymore. Now, if all you're saying is because they can do it, for this election and this election only, we will also do it. We will do it completely honestly, and we will make sure that the votes are accurate. Then my Uncle Trump, or whatever he would be, will, not Uncle Father-in-law, will make it illegal. If that's what you're saying, fine. But if you expect to do this in further elections, hence as a new strategy, as a new normal strategy, I'm not for it. She says, the article says, she has also suggested that the RNC embrace early voting for the upcoming election. Quote, the truth is, if we want to compete with the Democrats, we cannot wait until election day, she said. If we want to compete, we must embrace early voting. Really? Why? Not sure that makes sense. I don't think that makes sense. You just vote on election day. What would be the difference? I mean, there probably are people who would vote, but don't want to go to the voting place to vote. The ballot harvesting would, I suppose, help with that. And maybe giving them more time to go and vote would help with that. But again, we're talking about help when we should not be encouraging that, because it should be the same on both sides. It should be that Democrats who don't want to get out their seat and vote, their vote doesn't get counted. Republicans who don't want to get out of their seat to vote, their vote doesn't get counted either. Only the people who get out of their seat and go to the polling place and vote, only their vote is counted, because only to them did it matter enough, and only to them can we verify that's what they believe. That's a decent metric, a decent way to filter out those who voluntarily don't think it's important enough for them to vote. Field says, any element that physically prohibits you from walking to your post box will most likely be so debilitating that a person will not have the energy to focus on what's going on TV. No, that's very... Field, that like maybe of all the debilitating injuries in the nation, maybe 10% match that, maybe 15, maybe 20. But no, there's loads of them that don't match that at all. Could be people that have, as Wes said, got their legs blown off in a war. Like, do you think that if people have an injury which is debilitating, they just don't do anything else but focus on that injury? They don't listen to like a podcast while they're back from work. They don't listen to news. They don't watch my show. Is anyone watching my show? Like, have you ever been in a wheelchair, even temporarily? Have you ever had a physically debilitating injury? No, there's loads and loads and loads of cases where I can see that being valid. Loads of cases. Nazi says the difference is getting the wrong size paper ballots for the readers in Republican-leaning. Yeah, no, absolutely. This is why I said it should either be an unmarked envelope, or it should just be a simple, standard, same everywhere envelope that just says election ballot. Even then, I think maybe just using unmarked is better. I think you should be getting a slip of standard size A4 paper, which is an official slip, which has nothing on it that could identify you. And you put your name and your signature and a few other things on, or not even your name maybe, but just something to verify it. And you send it back. And if there's a list of people who are acceptable to use the system, and it's very locked down, but you use a blank envelope so that no one can tell it's a vote. That way it can't be manipulated, it can't be taken, it can't be misused unless someone wants to mass grab people's mail, which might also happen, but they're going to get a much lower rate of success by that. Than when the election stuff is all wrapped up together with like heavy election ballot stuff all over it with a bunch of mysterious numbers which correspond to regions, which corresponds to voting intention, all in the same bag, many of which mysteriously go missing. No, I think unmarked, user-provided envelopes sent to the right address. Maybe even a way to obscure the address. I don't know, like, because the address can identify it if you're sending it to the address. But still, I think it's better than it being too obvious, especially being sent all in mass. I guess for those that are infirm, maybe their vote should have to be traced back to their identity. That's the trade-off. Still, there's potential for intimidation there if someone knows what they voted for. I don't like that. But I think it's a reasonable trade-off. So maybe in that case, it should have to be. Ultimately, there's no way to absolutely prove that someone wrote it, like someone signed it themselves. But you can get close enough. For the tiny portion of people, relatively speaking, who are infirm and still want to vote, it's probably 1 or 2% of the population. That's a margin of error low enough that even if 10% of those are false. It's a tiny, tiny portion, and that could still be a problem, but I don't think it's going to swing the election anywhere. The amount of, like, if you put the safe standards in place and the opponent cheats within them, then there's still a very, very small amount of damage they can do from that. Solness says blank envelope. Yeah, you'd have to have an address on there, I agree. And the address would correspond to where it's going. I agree with that as well. I'm not sure how you get around that, but maybe there could be a way. Poor wording, then substitute arrange for the necessary facilities for transport or a request for an absentee ballot for walk. Maybe. Well, that's what I mean, though, Field. Absentee ballot. They're then mailed in. Like, mail-in ballots should only be available to those who physically cannot go to the election place. And there should be some decent limitations on what counts for that. Things that are not... Like, I would even say that if you're too fat, you don't get a mail-in ballot. Something that is within your control. Then again, how do you judge that? Well, you have to have a process, but it should be a very small portion of people. Maybe you could have a system instead where they phone in. Maybe that would be more secure. I'm not sure, though. Maybe they phone in and have to give an ID number that only they know, or some password or something. Something that is then linked to their I don't know, directly linked to their medical details. But you could make it a lot more secure. You could make it secure enough that it won't be a problem. Yeah, as Soldner says, some of the rigging methods in 2020 were so obviously wrong, so obviously illegitimate, that even a hint of policies to make the election safer would be enough. But again, it's not just the policies, because the policies in place are usually fine. The people don't employ the policies. Probably because, and this is maybe the main issue, it's not even the legislation. The main issue is probably that the election places themselves are fully staffed with leftist activists who know what they're doing. It wouldn't take many. It wouldn't have to be a big conspiracy. It would be maybe a dozen or so people per state, and even then only in the swing states. So it wouldn't take much. That's what happened. Puma says, tail as old as time, the rules are fine, but people are not following them is the issue. Exactly. Yeah, that's the case with, I'd say, most of the issues with the culture war. Is the policies are okay. Maybe it could be better, but they're okay. People just aren't following them. All right, that is it for that article. But I'm gratified that I have misgivings about the ballot harvesting thing. But as I say, if it's just this once, because it's something they do as well, whatever, it's acceptable for just this once. But then make it impossible later. Other than that, though, I am very glad to see that there is actually some thought going into this, into what can be done to prevent election rigging and to combat election rigging. Trump's legitimate votes might be enough on their own to overcome Biden's legitimate votes plus all the illegitimate ones. It might be enough on its own, because it almost was in 2020, and he's more popular now than he was in 2020, and Biden's less. So it might be enough on its own, but that's not good enough. Prevent the election rigging as well. Win by a landslide, in which case. I think it's deserved. And obviously prosecute the people that do it wrong, which is what the policies would be for, more specific policies. But again, a lot of them are already in place. You just need to actually prosecute them. So yeah, I'm glad that work is being done to go the extra mile, to not just win with an overwhelming mass of correct votes, but also prevent our enemy getting invalid votes as well.